I'm Haze Hartwig. This is Bamboo, Vancouver's property management and investment podcast. All right, so welcome to the show, everyone. Today we have Ken back with us from VRI. He's the OG VRI guy.
Hello.
Nice, man. So what we're going to go through today is the stats for July. And typical of July, we have, as per usual, up. It seems like that's the only thing that these things do these days. Rent went up again in Metro Vancouver by $51 again. So that's bringing the average to $2,381 for July. I think this is like the fifth month in a row or so. What much since March is how much this has gone up.
Yeah, right? It's very, very disconcerting. It's not stopping.
Yeah,
it doesn't seem like it's stopping anytime soon.
Yeah, it's like really tough for tenants now, man. I don't understand how people are going to do it. But anyways, we'll get in through all the ins and outs of that. The reason why we're using one bedroom unfurnished as our baseline for anyone who's listening here is because that's kind of the easiest one to go through. Obviously, there's variables for two bedrooms and furnished and short term and so on and so forth. So our baseline when we're talking about how much the average rent is on something is a one bedroom unfurnished, your standard issue unit. So you've seen these trends going up lately? I'm assuming like with your...
Yeah, I mean, I do see a trend where, you know, prices have not stopped in the last 10 months, specifically downtown Burnaby, metro area, where you see a lot of newer high rises. There seems to be an influx of demand, and rightfully so, with a lot of people moving to the province. Also, the new buildings that are being built in the Burnaby core, the Metrotown area, Brentwood, and those are commanding sky high prices.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting seeing like in Burnaby where it looks like every time you turn around there's another tower coming in. Like it's nuts up there, right? So I imagine with the cost of pre-build now, I mean, they're going to be looking for max dollar on the investment.
Yeah, and they have to, because as an investor, and majority of them are investor owned or people who buy them for the purpose of renting out. They need to make the dollar count, and their lending costs have skyrocketed in the last year, and therefore the only way to recoup it is really just to charge the end user, which is the renter, on a price that makes sense for them to cover their basic costs.
Yeah, and even then, I think in a lot of cases it's probably not covering it, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I'm looking at the prices of the new ones down in New West where they built into the Fraser River. I mean, that can't be cheap.
No, not at all. Yeah, we know, you and I both know a lot of clients, and it'll be very hard to come up with, a handful of people who are cash flow positive. Too,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Now, speaking of trends, like we obviously always talk about pricing, and the media loves to just hammer us with that over and over and over. Have you noticed any other trends, such as like, has your age demographic changed, or people with families, or like, is there any other trends that was it prevalent, say, even a couple of years ago?
Yeah, definitely. I'm starting to see more and more people who are getting savvy with their living arrangements. So more occupants for a unit, for example, a one bedroom unit. We're getting more and more people that are trying to roommate with families. So whether it be a couple and their brother, a couple and their cousin, a couple and their mother or mother-in-law, you're seeing this more prevalent.
Yeah, definitely the same thing, is that we're getting like, there's a lot of bodies coming for like a one bedroom. Like, holy cow, how y'all going to fit in here?
Yeah, but I can understand both sides of the coin, just because, with the rent being where it's at now, it makes sense for tenants to share that cost amongst themselves, and that's why they need to bring more bodies to, I guess, split the rent evenly.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, absolutely, right. Yeah. So, so we said that the increases have happened over there. Since March, it's been up $173. That's this year alone. So this trend is likely, as we just sort of touched in on, the trend is likely not going to change with the Bank of Canada has continued to raise the overnight rate. Like, it seems every freaking chance they get, it's just up.
Yeah, again, it's back to my point. I do believe it is, hand in hand with what's happening in our country, and with the interest rates raising up. As an investor, as someone who owns properties, they are going to pass that down to the end consumer just to make the cash flow work.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it seems almost like we're on our way to like some of the highest benchmark we've seen. I think this year we might see it simply for the fact that these increases have been so fast and heavy, as well as we're getting closer to when students are starting to look for places. So like high interest rates combined with high competition, like I think we're not doom and gloom, but it's not looking awesome.
Yeah, I don't want to say there's a breaking point, but there's some desperation right now in the market. And, from example, there has been a few conversations between myself and some parents of students who just call us to inquire and also get our suggestion on how to, best make of, getting their kids in the market for rental. And like you said, I don't want to be doom and gloom, but some of the advice that I provide them, it doesn't look good. For example, UBC, their supply capacity is already maxed. There's just not a lot of supply to begin with. Absolutely. And there's a lot of students now that, COVID's over and people are going back to school in person. They need to be in that area. They don't want to trek out, all the way to Langley or Coquitlam and travel 2 hours a day just to go to school.
Yeah.
So, that being said, people are getting desperate in finding accommodations, and there's really no relief in any near sight.
Well, absolutely. I mean, and according to live.rent, like one of the sites that we use for marketing, they do have some pretty good stats and whatnot. They've shown that the increase from July of last year is at an average of 352. So, wow, like it's staggering.
Wow.
To see this. So, like, I mean, luckily for the people who are already in their place, they, the tenants only have to deal with a 2% increase this year and not the full 352 straight to the jaw kind of thing. That being said, though, I find that when we get into a little bit tighter times like this is where everyone comes out of the woodwork. You get craziness on the owner's side, you get craziness on the land or on the tenant side, and yeah, man, it's an interesting.
It's a very interesting time, To your point, 100%. We do have clients who, I guess, fortunately, they have had stable tenants, but they're looking at what's happening in the market now, and they're telling themselves they can get X amount much more if they re-rented it. And so, it is what it is. It's one of those cases where, no one can predict the market, and no one could have predicted where the rents are today. But it is where it is now, and we're at an all-time high, like you said.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And as I sort of alluded to, that like this is sort of where we get into these sort of sticky issues, because now we'll end up with like some landlords that are going to either sell because their renewals are coming up, which is just going to add to the problem because we're going to end up with less rentals, basically, and dealing with that side of it. As well as, like, we always hear more of the complaints of the greedy landlords, quote unquote, you know what I mean? Where, like, oh, they're just trying to get the most money. And it's like, well, they're also paying $600 more a month. So, of course, they're trying to sort of offset this. And it's sort of a delicate balance almost, you know what I mean? Like, I understand both sides of the coin, but, like, there's no discount eggs for the greedy landlords. Like, everyone's hit with the same sort of inflation stuff, and there needs to be a balance and breaking point, but I don't know, this is where things get usually pretty nuts.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very messy conversation, and to your point, you are correct. It's people want to vilify landlords for owning properties, but at the end of the day, majority of them, in our experience, I can't speak for everyone else, but in our experience, they're just average people, making the same payments, as ourselves, people who have homes, and they need to cover the costs. So if it doesn't make sense for them financially, they need to make the next best decision for themselves, either to sell, dispose, move in, or raise the rent some way, somehow, just to cover the costs. Right? I think nobody wants to be in the hole to their bank, especially with the rates so high. It just doesn't make financial sense. Yeah,
absolutely. But I mean, and that's what I'm saying. It has to be weary on both sides, because there are bad landlords. I mean, you and I have met and fired a couple of them. You know what I mean? And we have heaps of stories. I'm sure when we get the whole group together for a couple episodes later on, we'll be.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's a discussion for another time. But yeah, it goes both ways. The two-way street, just like any other business. I do believe there are good and bads on both sides of the coin, and unfortunately, right now the current economic situation we're in, rents all-time high. Landlords have no choice but to follow where the market's going and, call it her mentality. But if given the opportunity, you as a landlord, you would do the same just to meet what the market is demanding.
Oh, absolutely. Right? And like one of the things that I harp on our show all the time is maintenance. Because especially when we get into such high rents, with it comes high demand. You know what I mean? So like if I'm going to be paying a premium dollar for this place, I'm expecting a premium product as well. So this is where
you're right. You're absolutely right. And that's where expectation comes into question. Yeah. Because when people are spending, 30, 40, sometimes 50% of their monthly income into rent, they do expect a level of service as well as expectation of the rental property that they're renting from, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. And I guess it's sort of a slight bias plug, of course, but this is maybe why some of these landlords should consider using a property manager, because we're a neutral party. We can have that frank and honest discussion, and to say like, look, your property's worth $2,700. You need 35. I don't think this is going to happen. So here's your options. You can either eat the cost and write it off, or maybe it might be time to sell. One of the two, you know what I mean? And it's terrible because sometimes you do talk with some of these landlords and they're like, oh, well, my cousin's friend's uncle's dog's boyfriend, whatever, says that I can get for this. And it's like, who are they again?
And that's the beauty of real estate. It's case by case. Every property is different. And although people may piggyback on other people's experiences or their opinion or whatever they've been able to obtain as a result, it doesn't necessarily translate to what each individual will be able to get. Yeah. Just because someone, like you said, their uncle got X amount, let's say $3,000 for one bed, doesn't necessarily mean that they can do the same, because there's so many factor variables, time of the year, tenancy. It could also be that the person who got $3,000 a month just got lucky. It was the time of the year where people were desperate. I hate to use the word desperate, but somebody was really, really wanting to rent that place and went above and beyond to rent it at $3,000. Oh, yeah. And I've seen more and more properties being priced at emotional pricing. It's not a legality word. It's more of a jargon that you and I both use. But some of these properties now, they're unicorn properties, and they're one-offs. There's no comparable of such. And so some of these landlords, they do want numbers where it's just shooting for the stars. You're shooting for the stars, and it's based on emotional pricing. It's a price that it's not justifiable, but somebody who has the means, who wants to be in that property, will pay that price just because there's the wow factor, wherever it may be, a penthouse, nice view, so on and so forth. Right? Yeah,
it's funny with the emotional pricing. Like I talk to a lot of landlords and I explain to them essentially, like, you don't always want the very tippy top. Like it's almost better to be like $100, even less than that tip top, because then you have 9 suitors as opposed to the only person who can rent this, in which case now you're going to take that because that's all you got. Whereas opposed to if you have 9, you can pick the best tenant who's going to, take care of the place, be there for a long time, this sort of thing, right? So it's funny you're talking about that emotional one, as well as I think there's almost a sense of keeping up with the Joneses, like, oh, if my neighbor got 3,000, then I need to get 31 because, my place is better, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's free market, right? It's only right that we want more. We believe that we can achieve more with what we have, right? It's not a bad notion, but people need to be careful. There are some difficulties when it comes to pricing too high, and you and I have experienced that, landlords shooting themselves in the foot by overpricing and having their unit stay vacant for months at a time.
Yeah, and then you're chasing that $100 and like, how long is it going to get you to get that 1 month of vacancy back? chasing
That's
this
correct.
$100. Like that's, arbitrarily, if it's a $3,000 rent, you're 30 months chasing that.
Exactly. And we always tell landlords, look, at the end of the day, we advise people, what the best solution is for the property that we're working with. But if they don't want to listen, it's up to them, right? It's we unfortunately we follow their lawful instructions, so we can only advise so much. And if it doesn't work out, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's sort of like too with the pricing as well. Like when you have to deal with, I don't know if you've noticed that Facebook Marketplace is full of absolute nut bars. Like
Oof.
I detest putting properties on there because it's just I think that sort of area of marketing towards is everyone's trying to look for a deal. So it's not a good quality. Like you get a bunch of people asking, but it's not a good quality lead.
Not just that. I mean, it seems like people who go on Facebook Marketplace, and I'm not saying everybody is the same, but it seems like people who respond, they believe in the bartering system. So they believe whatever we post, it is negotiable or even bid, to be bid on.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no formality, and I think that's the biggest issue we run into for Facebook.
Yeah, definitely. So it's sort of a weird thing. The other thing I started looking at I had a crazy experience a couple weeks ago. We had to get over and deal with a possible police breaching the door, and I know that you've had to deal with this a couple of times, and it's sort of I just wanted to sort of share this with our listeners. Another reason why you may want to consider using a professional. My landlord was in Idaho or Utah on a business trip. So he received a call as the owner. I guess it didn't have my information or whatever. So he calls me and basically tells me that the police are there doing a wellness check and they're getting ready to breach the door, which they're like $2,500, $3,000.
They're expensive. Doors in strata property, they're very expensive because they need to meet, of course, the fire code and also the scheme of every other door in the building. So they're custom one-off mates, right? They're not something you can walk in Rona or Home Depot and pick up and install.
Oh, exactly.
Very expensive.
So the landlord I was working there with was quite happy that I was able to get there in 15 minutes as opposed to having a battering ram come through his door and blow it open. So just another sort of another reason why people may want to consider professional property management, not only for being a neutral party between landlord and tenant, but also just we have a single job, take care of the unit. So.
That's great. I'm a huge advocate for hiring people, within their means. And what I mean by that is, if you do hire a property manager, please make sure they are stationed relatively near the property itself. It makes no sense. For example, I'm based in Vancouver. It makes no sense for me to have to manage a property out in Langley. Should something happen in your scenario, emergency call that you get, it would take me 2 hours to get out to Langley just to service that call, right? Yeah. So it doesn't serve the client.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of realtors. I mean, you got your sales license as well. Have license, will travel, and you'll see somebody from Chilliwack with the listing in downtown Vancouver, and you're going how you doing this? I
mean, I understand. We all started, new and green at one point in our careers. Back in the day, I suppose you would just take any business that you can get because you need to make a name for yourself. But as you grow in this industry and as you gain experience under your belt, you realize some businesses aren't worth taking on just because you have standards, and owners should have standards as well. It's a two-way business. If your standard is a certain level, but the owner's standard is somewhere else that you can't meet, it's never going to work out. It's constant fighting, or there's disagreements, or there's going to be a disappointment, and that's one thing that you and I don't like to.
You don't want to disappoint nobody.
Yeah, you don't want to disappoint anyone.
Yeah, and there's the thing too. But anybody who's thinking about becoming an owner or a landlord, as it were, should definitely interview their people.
Oh, absolutely.
And I find it amazing that a lot of people just don't. Somebody just shows up and they're like, okay, here's the keys to my over $500,000 investment. See ya.
Yeah, absolutely. But at the same time, to their defense, most of the business that we've been obtaining over the last couple of years have been to word of mouth and referral.
True.
And those ones, ultimately they do, I hate to use the word, but they do hold us to a higher standard just because we've had experience with the family or relatives and so on and so forth, right? But to your point, absolutely, I think owners should interview property managers, if not several, before they make a decision, and just choose one that they're most comfortable with. Choose one they're most comfortable with, that can resolve issues, their experience, their company, who's backing their company, accounting team, so on and so forth, and go from there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you're building a team, so you don't know who your team members are.
Exactly.
So moving on with we were talking about the Greater Vancouver and all that. The average rent per square foot in the Greater Vancouver district right now is at $2.99. So we'll call it $3 per square foot, with the top being North Van at $3.87, Vancouver proper being at $3.70, and Burnaby being at $3.57. Typical stuff. I mean, Burnaby seems to be chasing Vancouver because it's the next city over. So I guess theoretically, Coquitlam and New West will be right behind them coming up. But it's interesting with the price per square foot, because that's not really the best gauge for pricing. What are some of the ways that you gauge it for pricing? Like somebody comes in and says, here's my 1 or 2 bedroom.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do we go? Like, what are you using to kind of arrive at your number?
I mean, we are fortunate enough as a team that we do have enough properties all around town that we can use as example to showcase owners what potentially their rent may be. And it's robust enough that we're dealing with current rent numbers, where we have active rent coming into our accounts to be dispersed to landlords to give them immediate information like, hey, look, your property today is worth X amount because we have a similarity product that we've already currently managed that we're bringing in X amount. Right. So on top of that as well, I mean, we do our general, comparative analysis. Everybody has their own way of doing it, but being an expert in our own cities, our own segments, it'd be intuitive that we know what we're talking about.
It's one of those nice things about like working with a team, though, that I can straight up like call you like, hey man, just got this one down the street. Like, I know you have 4 in the building across it. What's going on? And you're like, oh, this is what's up.
Exactly. And we share trends. Like half of the time it's not about number talk. It's more what the trend is, what we're feeling in the neighborhood. Are we seeing an influx of people coming in? Or are we seeing an influx of people moving out? Right. These things all affect the rental prices.
Yeah. And it's funny too, because it is, I always use SFU, for instance, as an example. If your place is vacant, in the middle of the summer, it's a tough ass grind to get that rented. But you come getting closer to September, you can basically just spray and pray. You know what I mean? Like it's there's certain just areas, like Peter was talking last month about the sunshine tax, how summer comes, all of a sudden kits and English Bay goes up.
Oh yeah.
When it's dead in the winter and it's gray and gloomy goes down. Right? Like,
Matthew was actually, he was telling us the other day, Lynn Valley is popping off too, Lynn Valley area.
That makes sense with all the mountain biking.
Yeah, mountain biking outdoor. And then you were calling those and the outdoor living concept buildings that are coming up there. Yeah. It seems to be, post-COVID, a lot of people, they no longer really want to be in the concrete high-rise. I'm not saying everybody, I'm saying there's a niche market for that, and it's done fairly well over there. Yeah,
I think from all the COVID, people are done with being inside. They're going, okay, man, let's go look around the world now. That means that almost 80% of the active listings are apartments. 49 of those are 2-bedroom units, and 36% are 1-bedroom units. Obviously, the rest are making up more or less, basement suites and whatnot. So it's funny you were talking about like UBC, for instance. I just talked about SFU. So maybe a tip for some of the students might be to set up a roommate situation prior, because there's more 2 bedrooms.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my tip to them really, or for anybody that's listening on the podcast, don't come to the showing not knowing your own situation. So what I mean by that is, you'll come to the showing, 2-bedroom, you feel like it's a great, compromise at the moment, you'll rent it and then you'll find a tenant further on. Don't do that. I would say to be able to stand out, have your situation identify in advance. So have a roommate that's already ready and prepared to apply together.
Mm-hmm.
Don't apply by yourself. Apply with your roommate that you're going to move into. That way it gives the landlord a better understanding and a report of just what the tenancy may entail.
Yeah, it's also better for the transparency because it doesn't have that feel like a bait and switch. You're like, oh, I'm just moving in and I'm this guy.
Yeah, exactly. Like, to your point, landlords are afraid of subletting. It's a huge issue in the city. It was more so a couple years ago. Now, with all the rules in place, it is less, seen upon. But what we don't want a scenario is, someone moves in and they start renting it to 3-4 other students, right? There's no control over that.
Yeah, absolutely not. The same thing too with the landlords when they're purchasing a place for an investment is they should really slow down and figure out what their avatar is. So like prime example is just talking about SFU. Generally it's going to be students. So know what you're getting into, know who you're marketing to. And it's the same thing like if you're wherever you're purchasing. One of the things I always suggest to investors when they're looking into something, if they're kind of questioning what the area and all that is, I tell them go like down and grab a coffee and sit there and drink your coffee and look around and see who's coming by.
Absolutely.
What are they wearing? What are they doing?
It's absolutely. Location, right? I mean, if you're going to buy a property in a certain neighborhood, walk the neighborhood.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
You should do it morning, evening, just to kind of get the vibe, see what the people are, see who you may be catering to, and then see the type of people that are renting, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like if you're in a area, like there's an area in US that used to be all 55 plus, and so you wouldn't be advertising that it's great for children. So you got to know who's in your hood, kind of thing, so you can make sure that you're barking up the right tree, as it were.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's basically it comes down all for transparency and then also that being said is that a lot of landlords and property managers won't deal with a roommate situation because we don't know if you're going to get along, man.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't mean that no one's going to rent to you. It just means that there are dynamics that some landlords are comfortable with and some landlords aren't, right? To a point, some roommates, they may have fights, they may have disagreements, and they may move out sooner than the other person. And at the end of the day, it is a headache for landlords if they need to consider this type of arrangement.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the flip side of that, though, however, people are looking for investment. With only 36% being one-bedroom units, there's obviously a high demand for those. So if any of the potential investors are listening, you should maybe be looking towards a one-bedroom place, especially with how all these rates have been going up. It's taking away people's buying power, right? So that might be a segment that any potential investor would be maybe want to look at the one bedroom simply for the fact that they're in higher demand and generally have a higher turnover as far as I've seen, just with the you got the bachelor guy living there and then significant partner moves in, they need a bigger place or they want to get a dog or have a baby or adopt a baby, whatever, they need more room, right? So like they start at the 1 and then they move to the 2 and then up, right? So then you can collect that 360 some odd year over year hop as a landlord. You know what I mean? So do you notice the same thing, that kind of you have higher turnover in a smaller units?
Yes and no. I mean, one bedrooms is kind of the bread and butter of the real estate, investment market, and they've always been fairly easy to rent out in comparison to some of the other products such as the 2 beds, the 3 beds, and then the occasional now the new trend is the junior 2s or the junior 1s. Those don't get me started. Those are they're not bad investments, but I do believe they serve a purpose in only particular market segments and not necessarily in all applications. I'll give you a quick example. Like, if you're in downtown core or Surrey core, where you have high rises and people who generally don't need that much space, those may work out. But if you're buying junior 2s in Coquitlam or somewhere else further out east, where generally speaking you have a lot of space, but some of these newer buildings are offering these products, it may be a bit difficult to rent out compared to the usual 1-beds or 1+ dens or the proper 2-bedroom units.
Yeah, which is interesting. Like the 3 least expensive cities right now is Surrey with an average of 1924, Langley with an average of 1941. So again, east, and then in third place, which is a little bit strange, shock to me, was Coquitlam at 2,098. Of course, West Van leads as per usual because they're mostly houses at 2910. This is all for your average 1-bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting that Coquitlam sort of jumped in there because it was always one of the more expensive cities, and now for some reason it's not. Just month only. Don't know why. Since March, it's always been in there.
I mean, look at what's happening in Coquitlam. I believe it's a very robust city now, and it's underrated. I mean, for anybody that wants to move out there, for anybody that wants to consider like Surrey or Port Coquitlam or anything else, look at Coquitlam Center. That whole area it's going up substantially.
Skytrain right in there.
Exactly. Last 10 years, and it's close to the highway. You get the mountains, right behind you as a backdrop, and it's a fabulous city.
Yeah, I mean, especially with the mountains so close, it does sort of like almost have a West Van feel. There's just so much trees and whatnot. You know what I mean? It's got a good feel to that. I quite dig Coquitlam a lot. And of course, we're talking about prices and that. For the third straight month, of course, all 5 of Canada's top most expensive cities are in Metro Vancouver. So,
no surprise.
What a surprise. BC, bring cash. West Van is number 1, North Van number 2, Vancouver proper number 3, Richmond, which I want to touch on, number 4, and Burnaby, of course, is number 5. Richmond is like a weird island. Why is all of a sudden their rent so high? Like, they always keep on slipping in here, and I'm confused. I mean, I don't work out there very much, so I don't know.
I mean, in my opinion, I do manage a few, properties out there, and the feedback has been good. I mean, the properties there, they're well equipped. The city has done a very good job incorporating a lot of amenities into some of these condos. They want more space, green space, whether it be green space or recreational facilities and whatnot. And so you really get more value for your dollar down there. And I think that's what's been trending. People who have looked at Vancouver, Burnaby, and they also look at Richmond, their money does go a bit further in the sense that they get more value for, the living space.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
Majority of the units that I've managed, they're fairly decent size. And, not to mention the neighborhood, if you're around like the Richmond core area, such as the Richmond Center, number 3 Road, you have all the amenities. You got the food, you got the groceries, you got the transits. Everything is all in one area. Yeah.
So I guess they're really starting to intelligently fill that in the plan, as it were. So
exactly. They're obviously, increasing density, but they're also doing it in a way where it's making people's lives, I guess, easier.
Yeah, for sure. That makes sense. And that's what all of these new builds seem to have. Like, they're adding now coffee shops and restaurants and stuff like that to kind of get people to stay where they are.
Yeah, so you don't have to drive, right? You don't have to drive 10 minutes, 15 minutes or whatever to where your destination is. You can just walk.
Yeah, absolutely, right? So now, as well, with like how it's been so competitive, and we know that things are getting crazier in the market and all that, tenant screening is super important, like more important than normally would be, because people are starting to get desperate. They're making things up. They're, getting friends to be their landlord and all these sort of things like this. What are some key items that you look for during your tenant screening? Like things that just red flags or even things that you don't pass the smell test. Like what are you looking at there?
Transparency. I mean, when someone puts their best foot forward, they're not hiding anything. They're not having you to go dig further into some of their information. They're telling you upfront what their situation is, and they're being honest about it. I know it's very difficult. You and I, and our colleagues as well, we've all been duped.
Oh yeah. I'll show you a story about my worst dupe. I'll show you a story of that in a second, man. Yeah.
We can check 99.9% of all credentials, and it will point towards the direction that everything's okay. All you need is that 0.1%, intention from the tenant to dupe us to really cause a mess. Oh, and it's just the people aspect of the business where, unfortunately, I say unfortunately because we would all love to be 100% accurate, but unfortunately it is a business and there are some risks involved, and we do our best based on our experience over the years and for thousands of tenants that we screen to come up and formulate ourselves with the ideal tenant to present to our landlords, and to also provide the proper suggestions to the landlords so they can make a sound decision of who to go with.
Yeah.
But it just takes that one person that's hiding something or with bad intentions to really cause the whole mess.
Yeah, so I'll share with my listeners my biggest dupe. It all ended up really fine and dandy, and they left, and there was no more from it. So it did end up with an easy end there. But I had a unit. I'll not say what city to protect the innocent, I guess. And so they came in, hands holding, nice couple, all this stuff, and all good. So we rented it to them. Everything was fine. No complaints from them. All good. However, about 3 months later, I get a call from the Strata, and they're saying that they have an exorbitant amount of visitors, and most of them are male, and most of them are at night. So I'm like, okay. So getting what they're alluding to, and so we go in there and do our 24 hours notice and go check and all that. And lo and behold, that this couple had actually turned it into a brothel. Yeah. I'm just like... Wow. So yeah, that definitely, I got duped hard because, everything checked out, all the paperwork, dude had a proper job, she had a 100%. Proper job, all, everything checked out, came in holding hands, honey baby, all that. Got me dead shot. I mean, it was earlier in my career, but it's like, damn it.
Yeah, it feels bad. I mean, we've all been burned, but, at the end of the day, I truly believe if someone's going to that extent to try and lie to you, there's no way you can predict it.
Yeah.
There's no way you can foresee it. It's not that, we're negligent by not catching X, Y, and Z or seeing the red flags up front. If someone's going through that trouble to try and lie to you, they're going to succeed one way or another.
Yeah, possibly. And it never really comes down to how to handle it. So luckily, because of our training...
That's correct.
I was able to get this handled quickly, efficiently, get this dealt with and out of here right away. We obviously used a professional cleaner afterwards, just saying. So there's that. I mean, the other thing too that tenants need to be careful of, and we should probably do a full show on this, is ways to protect the tenants, because right now there's a lot of sketchy people out there trying to dupe tenants, and subletting or just taking photos from another place and just renting it to 100%. People.
Actually, we've been the victims ourselves. We've been caught out many times, and no fault to ourselves. People take our ads, they take our photos, and they post online just to generate leads. And we get phone calls to the office. Not recently, but I'm saying in the past. We get phone calls to our office asking if these ads were legit, refer us to the ads, and these may be properties that have been rented for the last year, 2 years.
Yeah,
but they're selling there online.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is one of the tips for the tenants, is that if you see an ad that you like, do some homework on that. Check to make sure that they are actually who they are. I like that people will call and say, hey, is this place still available or whatever, tell me about it, and then they can find out quickly that this ain't right, or something's not there, especially one of the ones that a lot of people are doing, and they take advantage of a lot of new Canadians, people new
That's
to
correct,
BC, don't know the rules, and try to collect a deposit before seeing the place and
that's
stuff
a big
like
no-no.
this.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
So I had dead shot for the tenants. Somebody asks you for that, bolt. There's no way that you want to be involved in this, because chances are 90% at least that it's a scam. You're going to lose your money.
Exactly. And to the listeners, when you're dealing with a licensed property management company like us, we are legally bound to put our brokerage's name on our advertisements, 100%. Right? This is part of the marketing act that, the rules in place. We need to disclose that we are a licensed brokerage, and, you're dealing with property managers, if you will.
Yeah, a proper licensed property.
Exactly.
That's exactly. The licensed is an important part here. Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of tips for tenants, and we probably will end up doing a show, I think, just straight up on scams for both landlords and tenants, just to sort of help people see in there, because there's a lot of weird things going on out there, especially during desperate times.
Exactly, and to your point, with the prices being where they are today, it's desperation. It's desperation on a lot of tenants' part who can't find places, and also people who see opportunity. These people who are scamming people, they see the opportunity in the desperation.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, It can be a dangerous world. It's kind of a gloomy episode we've done today. Usually it's a little nicer, but yeah, we've touched in some nasty stuff. But so I mean, basically overall, for both sides, landlords and tenants, make sure for the transparency, don't be afraid to ask those questions, because you don't want to end up getting bit in the butt later and it'd be no good for nobody.
Exactly. Ask questions, therefore you don't have false expectations, so on and so forth.
Awesome. Well, it looks like we're running kind of short on time here, so do you have anything to add there, Ken?
I think that's it for today. I mean, I'm more than happy to jump on other podcasts later on and talk about other subjects.
Yeah, for sure. And if anyone's looking to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to find you?
Yeah, definitely. You can go on our website, VancouverRent-It.com. That's Vancouver, RENTIT.com. Or send me a quick text message or give me a call at 604-839-7368.
Excellent. Yeah, and I'll throw that in the description down below so people can find it, because, they might be driving or something. So thank you very much for everybody tuning in. If you've made it this far, thank you extra. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. That we'll be talking with Aaron from Core Inspection, about inspecting a property. So that way anyone for the potential landlords will know some pitfalls that they can look into. So thank you for tuning in. If you liked this or found anything useful, be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.